that's a very tough act for me to follow. My God, this is so moving. I have jokes written into this speech and now nobody's going to laugh at them. God. Another round of applause for them. Really, so brave, such bravery. Gosh. Well, hello, everyone. Hey, hello. It's so great to be here talking in front of a live crowd. Yay! We're back, thank God. So exciting. Look, it is already September. Can you believe it? And 2022. My God, it's October! I'm going mad. It's October, everyone. See, I wrote the speech in September, which was Friday, and now it's October. It's October, and 2022 is well and truly marching to a close. It's been a year of change. We've had a change of government. We've had a change in our COVID mentality, thank God. We've had a change in interest rates and inflation, unfortunately. And most recently and tragically, a change in our monarch. The passing of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, while not unexpected, was in many ways a terrible shock. I mean, we were all aware, of course, of her advanced years, but I was one of many people that I spoke to who just assumed she would live forever. Such was the incredible presence that she had in all of our lives. It's a testament to the late Queen's extraordinary leadership, stellar character, and stoic life of public service that so many Australians were so bereaved when she passed. And similarly, the enthusiasm in Australia back in June about her wonderful Platinum Jubilee also indicated how integral a part of our national identity the monarch is. Which is why I am always just so astounded by the attempts of certain nefarious agents of change to insist that the monarchy is somehow irrelevant in Australia. And as I mentioned, 2022, it is a year of change, and this climate of change, pardon the pun, is influencing the usual suspects to push for more upheaval, not just in the form of an Indigenous voice to Parliament, but in the form of an Australian republic. Oops. Now, if you think we need an Indigenous voice to Parliament like Anthony Albanese needs to mention he grew up in public housing again, I can guarantee you we need an Australian republic about 1 million times less than that. And I say this knowing full well, despite that lovely round of applause, that I am likely not preaching entirely to the converted here. There are certainly a few conservatives out there who are in favour of a republic. Do we have any here today? Or do you not want to out yourself? Well, look, if we have any here today, I recognise that you are technically a marginalised minority community within the conservative movement, and I assure you, you are totally valid. I think that's the language we're supposed to use. So I would like to make it clear that in this speech, I will be referring exclusively to Republicans on the regressive left, who tend to not be motivated by a desire to improve the country. So in other words, to any conservative Republicans who might watch this, if I possibly say some really mean things about the Republican movement in Australia, I promise I'm not talking about you. So, as an uber-monarchist, arch-royalist and renowned Anglophile, you may have gathered that I am rather opposed to the idea of Australia becoming a republic. In fact, I find the idea repugnant, not least because there's simply no need, but also because the trendy cultural leaders of the Republican movement and their various noisy lackeys in the media and on social media have, in my opinion, toxic ulterior motives. They do. Now, there are two types of left-wing Republican. The first is the old school Republican, motivated to act by something I like to call Whitlam derangement syndrome. Think Peter Fitzsimons and the Australian Republic movement. Although coincidentally, Peter Fitzsimons actually stepped down as chair of the Australian Republican movement yesterday, I think. You must have heard I was doing this speech. Anyway, Whitlam derangement syndrome is, as of course I'm sure you know, the intergenerational resentment harboured by those on the left who just cannot accept that sometimes their proverbial political team, in this case it was the Whitlam Labor government, makes mistakes that are worthy of reprimand. Therefore, they have been vaguely seeking to avenge Gough Whitlam's 1975 dismissal as Prime Minister by the Governor-General at the time for nearly 50 years. Imagine ruminating on that for 50 years. Get a life. God. That queen, oh, the evil queen. You can just hear them saying it behind closed doors. How dare she interfere with Australia's political landscape? And yes, we have to make sure we become a republic because that'll really show the British monarchy, etc., etc. Only as it turned out, the crux of their chagrin was revealed to be unfounded in 2020 with the release of the Palace Letters by the National Archives of Australia. Now, these were about 200 letters between the then Governor-General Sir John Kerr, who dismissed Whitlam, and the Queen's then Private Secretary, Sir Martin Charteris. Now, far from being the smoking gun I'm sure many of these old-school Republicans wished for, proving once and for all that a foreign entity meddled inappropriately in our democracy, and so on and so forth, the Palace Letters revealed that, in fact, Sir John Kerr did not inform the Queen before he made the decision to dismiss Gough Whitlam, and that Sir Martin Charteris did not offer any encouragement for him to do so, acknowledging only that the Governor-General does indeed have reserved powers to use in this way, but that they should only be used as a last resort. Ha ha. Oh, I loved that. And yet still, these old-school Whitlam deranged Republicans continue in their crusade to make Australia a republic, not for the betterment of the nation, because there is nothing about being a republic that would demonstrably make the nation any better, but because they have a 47-year-old axe to grind. Now, the second type of left-wing Republican, and this is a sort of new-ish incarnation, are the far-left identity politics opportunists who, living in the alternate universe in which straight, white, cisgender men are just like so evil and just oppress everyone, oh my God. We all know one or two of them, or more. They really just jump at any chance to tear down various Western institutions. And in the case of a republic, they insist that the Crown is a colonialist, racist oppressor, and that in order to be free from this racial oppression, we need to become a republic. Green Senator Lydia Thorpe gave the best example of this mindset a couple of weeks ago at an anti-Crown protest on the National Day of Mourning, where, covered in fake blood, she screamed hysterically about how apparently the Crown's boot is on our necks. However, this argument has a major flaw. Insisting that something is oppressing you implies that that thing has some sort of power over you. The problem with this in relation to the British monarchy is that the Crown hasn't had any power to proverbially oppress anyone since 1689. Thanks to the English Parliament passing the Bill of Rights. This established the doctrine of parliamentary supremacy, which made Parliament the supreme source of lawmaking, thus significantly limiting the powers of the monarch, and described several abuses of power by King James II, who was the monarch at the time, as illegal. No more divine authority of kings and queens to rule. Somebody please inform Lydia Thorpe. It is this willful misconception about the powers of the monarch, or lack thereof, that old school Republicans and the identity politics opportunists have in common. And it feeds two of the main arguments as to why Australia apparently needs to become a republic. I'm sure you've all heard derivatives of these bandied around. The first argument they put forward is that Australia should have an Australian head of state, and the second is that we need to be independent from the UK. Now, as the left likes to say, let's unpack this. First, the argument that Australia needs an Australian head of state. Now, as it stands, the British monarch is generally regarded to be Australia's head of state, and some people find that objectionable for some reason. However, insisting the monarch is our head of state relies on a rather superficial reading of our Constitution. It is important to remember that the only function of the King and Queen, that is, the sovereign, under our Constitution, is to appoint and dismiss the Governor-General as advised by the Prime Minister. All other constitutional functions are exercised by the Governor-General, who also acts on behalf of Prime Minister and Cabinet, with the exception of said reserve powers that I mentioned earlier. The monarch, as the sovereign, has no control over the Governor-General and cannot exercise the constitutional powers of the Governor-General. Therefore, as outlined in The Spectator by the Honourable Ken Handley KC, not QC, who served as a judge on the New South Wales Court of Appeals for 22 years, so in other words, he knows his stuff. Since the Constitution does not identify our head of state, it follows that the head of state must be the person who exercises the functions of, well, the head of state. And since the only power the sovereign has is to appoint and dismiss the Governor-General on the advice of Prime Minister and Cabinet, remember 1689, the only entity here exercising those head of state powers is the Governor-General, who is Australian. So in summary, while Republicans lament the alleged lack of an Australian head of state, they're willfully overlooking the fact that we already have an Australian head of state in the form of the Governor-General. This was upheld by the courts as far back as 1907 in Harvey, the Governor of South Australia, when the High Court itself referred to the Governor-General as the officiating constitutional head of the Commonwealth and described the King as the sovereign, not the head of state. The High Court treated this decision as authoritative in 1981, 1987, 1988 and 1998. So you can well and truly dismiss the argument about how apparently we don't have an Australian head of state as a complete furphy. The second argument, which requires much less technical jargon to debunk, never fear, is that Australia is somehow not independent from the UK. This is a particularly stupid argument, and it's also untrue. Aside from the Bill of Rights passed by the English Parliament in 1689, any remaining powers that the UK had legally over the Australian states were abolished in 1986 by the Australia Act. We are well and truly independent of any nefarious meddling by the UK and have been for decades. So with arguments 1 and 2 debunked, what are left-wing Republicans to do? Well, the old school crowd will turn to the identity politics crowd for guidance on this. I guarantee you, when it comes to the next battle for our Constitution, the big argument Republicans will push is that if you support the monarchy and vote no to a republic, then you are racist. That will be it. Rather than weaponize patriotism as they did in 1999, Republicans will do the opposite. They will run their usual line that Australia is a racist, white supremacist, colonialist society under the boot of the Crown, and that the only way to atone for this is to become a republic. The usual shtick with a constitutional twist. This is a hard argument to cut through because nobody wants to be called a racist, but I'm hoping that after the Indigenous Voice to Parliament public commentary, which will be saturated with racial commentary, people will just sensibly ignore it. So at this point in my speech, you might be wondering, well, Daisy, if the monarch is not our head of state and we're independent from the UK, well, why don't we just make the transition and switch our Governor-General with a president? Well, to that I'd say, why the hell should we? Why should we? The absurd thing about this whole argument is that monarchists are being forced to excuse and defend something that is flawless. There is literally nothing wrong with being a constitutional monarchy, nor do we benefit in any way, whether it's national sovereignty, self-determination, and the rest, from becoming a republic. This isn't just a simple matter of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Becoming a republic would be willfully introducing major and totally unnecessary political upheaval into our lives for the sake of sating a small number of activists' historical grudges. And in the wake of nearly 3 years of upheaval by the reprobates in our state and federal governments, who on earth wants that? Thank you very much, everyone. God bless you all.